When it comes to Halo, Luke and I have definitely spent a ton of time trying different ways to experience the franchise, whether it's playing through Halo without shooting, without walking, or just making ourselves just grind through the worst imaginable thing possible. If it comes to Halo, we're down for it. But there was one Halo game that we've been wanting to cover on this channel for quite a long time that's not necessarily easily accessible, and was one that Luke and I wanted to cover at the same time, but with Luke living across the country, the opportunity never presented itself. Until recently, when Luke and I randomly woke up in a Dave & Buster's in New York City, and finally, for the first time ever, we could play through the entirety of Halo Fireteam Raven, and oh boy, was this hype and exciting, but also not at all what we expected it to be. Now, if you guys didn't know, a couple of years back, 343 teamed up with Raw Thrills and Play Mechanics to bring to life the first ever Halo arcade machine, and it was always intended to be this state-of-the-art top big attraction for any Dave & Buster's or arcade location that could support it. Interestingly enough, with variations of this game built for 2 to 4 players and different sizes existing in the wild, just from looking at this game itself, you can tell that as far as craftsmanship goes, it's a premium arcade cabinet. And we were fortunate enough to be able to find a full 4-player version. So we went to the front counter at the Dave & Buster's, cashed in some real money for in-game credits on those little cards, and settled in to try out Fireteam Raven for the very first time. So as far as story goes, we weren't expecting too much for a Halo arcade game. We assumed we would be playing as Fireteam Raven, considering the name of the game, and essentially each seat or weapon in the game represents one different ODST member in the Fireteam. What we didn't actually expect was that the entire story of this game is very closely married to the original Halo Combat Evolved story, but at the same time, it has its own story in there as well. It's pretty irrelevant because right away you kick off and you're just like in the game, in the Pillar of Autumn, fighting things off in this on-rail shooter that moves pretty quickly. Now, first impressions here, the game is pretty impressive. The overall presentation is definitely top-notch. It feels like this very premium arcade experience, and it's cool to see Halo transported into this cabinet. But interestingly enough, if you watch trailers for Fireteam Raven, it always shows like the coolest little sequence or set piece, and very little gameplay itself unless it cuts away really quickly. And watching something like a trailer or some sort of promotional sequence for Fireteam Raven, and then you go and actually play Fireteam Raven, it's gonna feel like two very different experiences. Now, obviously, this isn't a game built for the hardcore Halo fanbase. This is supposed to be a very casual, entry-level Halo experience that literally anyone who has no experience with Halo, who just happens to walk by the machine and thinks it looks cool, can try the game out and experience Halo. However, as a general first-person on-rail shooter, it's really not that spectacular. I mean, you go through the scenes and the rooms and you shoot stuff and you have a health bar that drains pretty aggressively, and essentially it's this very rapid rinse and repeat where you're turning into a room, shooting stuff, moving into the next room, shooting more stuff, and so on while you're trying to kill the stuff before it hits you and takes away some of your health. This is a standard thing in a lot of on-rail shooters at arcades, though I do have to say in other games I feel like there's a very obvious indication that you are being attacked and that there is this imminent threat that you need to focus your shots on first, where in Fireteam Raven it's not as apparent right away, especially since there's 2 giant screens there with 4 players. We kind of learned maybe an entire level or 2 in that whatever's going on screen number 2 has absolutely no impact on what we're doing over on our screen, so any shots we're shooting over on the other screen were actually hurting us because we would be getting attacked by stuff on our side and only be helping the players in the other 2 seats if there were actually players there. And this was something we noticed as we would wait around and see if we could get a chance to have the machine to ourselves. More often than not, some people would jump into the game, sit down for a second, play their 1 life, and immediately not swipe their card again for a second go. It seems like the drop-off rate for this game was considerably higher than what we would expect from a game like this, and I think it's because the game is so rapidly repetitive that you kind of get the entire experience of what the game's gonna be like in just a couple of minutes of playing, rather than feeling rewarded for making progress and seeing brand new settings and having new experiences along the way. But that didn't stop Luke and I from being determined to play the game beginning going to end no matter what the cost, and boy did it cost us. I did think it was really interesting though that this whole story takes place during the events of Combat Evolved, whether that makes sense or not. For instance, in the first level, you're a squad of ODSTs on the Pillar of Autumn, fighting your way through just like Master Chief did, and boom, at the end of the level, Master Chief even shows up, and is he helping a Marine get into an escape pod? Are you meaning to tell me that during this iconic cutscene from Halo Combat Evolved, there was a squad of 4 ODSTs just standing right there behind the Master Chief, and he just left them all behind and left on his very way? I mean, considering the survival rate of that escape pod, it's probably for the better that those ODSTs weren't on there, but it is a little funny that it's just this big moment that happens when we're just standing right there behind him. And there's more instances of this where there's this weird random crossover throughout the game. Either way, we continue fighting through, we shoot some stuff, and eventually, while switching out and trying out new weapons along the way, we get to the end of the level, which consists of the ODSTs jumping in drop pods and dropping onto the Halo ring. Oh, also, it's worth noting there is some exposition to how the story all ties in, and there's this AI giving instructions to Fireteam Raven, which is interesting because I thought Cortana was the only on-ship AI, but apparently there was another one. Either way, level 2, we're out in the desert or something, and there's some cool looking set pieces with like vehicles and warthogs, and that's about it. Buggers actually show up, which was something that haven't been in a Halo game in a very long time, and also weren't in Combat Evolved, so it was kind of cool that they were drawing from the extended universe for some sort of the enemy classes, and it was nice to have something a little bit different. And we got to experiment more with some of the different weapon sets in Fireteam Raven, and honestly, they're not really that interesting. Okay, the rocket launcher is kind of fun, and eventually we got to try other weapons too. But for the most part, a lot of the guns you pick up feel exactly the same as the assault rifle, just with a different color bullet coming out of it if it's like a Covenant weapon. It didn't actually feel like we had to change our strategies up at any time. We didn't feel like there was that distinct shield bursting on an elite and then wanting to go for the quick headshot. It just felt like a regular health bar that was drained. When we had needlers in some levels, it never really felt like there was a cool super combined explosion related to how well we were shooting or if we teamed up on shooting certain enemies. They just had a set amount of health. There's a few weapons that worked a little bit differently that were fun, but it felt like 70% of the guns were just different versions of essentially the assault rifle. But yeah, either way, on the second level, you're just kind of in the middle of this over-the-top battle with just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of chaos, and that stuff looks cool. As far as affecting the gameplay, it doesn't. They're just breaks in between the gameplay. By level 3, the appeal of this game was definitely starting to maybe wear thin on us. At first, it was fun because we're in a recognizable area, and the second level was this big set piece. By level 3, we're just at some base that we have to protect that's being attacked, and it feels a lot of more of the same experience that we had so far. A lot of the really cool crossover set pieces weren't really happening just yet. I mean, it's more or less the same thing, and also at this point, we had died quite a few times, and we just kept re-swiping our cards, and we realized that this wasn't going to be the most inexpensive game at Dave & Buster's, and we decided just to commit to it because we were going to beat this game one way or another, no matter what the costs. This level was probably the worst level out of all of them just because the set piece was kind of boring. There wasn't a lot going on. We got to fight some hunters as the boss, which is a little interesting. You can actually stop them from shooting if you can get enough bullets into them, and that's kind of an interesting mechanic. Also at this point, our hands were kind of getting sore from just holding the guns and shooting for so long. We're a good like 15 to 20 minutes into the game at this point for being in the third level, so it was starting to really drag on. Ice Canyon was the 4th level of the game, and this time it was a little bit better because at least we're in another recognizable location. We were on Assault on the Control Room, and this was kind of fun because we got to fly around and see some recognizable areas, and the Flood also shows up here, and the Flood did kind of mix up the gameplay a little bit. They're a little spookier, they're a little harder to kill, and they definitely jump at you a little bit more in more of a predictable manner, more like what you would see in a House of the Dead type arcade game, and we kind of were enjoying the change of pace at first, but once you've played a couple of rounds against the Flood, it starts to blend in with how the Covenant is, and it very easily becomes repetitive as well. It was kind of interesting though, they did expand on the Halo universe a bit more, this time having Flood tank forms, which were present in Halo 3 in this area that comes from Combat Evolved, and Master Chief showed up again, and this time he nodded at us. It was like seeing a little celebrity cameo appearance, and he just kind of nodded at us and then just ran back to go do his own Master Chief thing, but at least we knew that he appreciated us. And I think at that point we can look past the gameplay being incredibly repetitive and just appreciate the fact that Master Chief nodded at us. Level 4 was a little bit interesting because it appears that we were on what we think is Forge World. I mean, it looks a lot like Forge World in parts of it. Then other parts of it do feel a lot like the Silent Cartographer. So we don't really know where we are or why we're here, but we had to fight a lot of the Flood near some Forerunner structure. And in some parts, it even felt like the opening area of the Covenant. So maybe it was just this conglomerate mixed together area. And it was probably one of the aesthetically more interesting levels just because we were distracted with trying to figure out where on Earth we were, or I guess where on a Halo ring we were. And the big surprise of this level, which definitely was pretty cool, was that we actually get to fight some Flood juggernauts as bosses, which were a cut Flood enemy type from Halo 2 that never made its way into the game. And people have talked about these cut versions for a long time. This is the first time we ever actually get to face off against them in a real video game. So that was kind of cool. It's unfortunate the bosses were incredibly two-dimensional. They were essentially hunters, but with long arms. We could shoot them and prevent them from attacking until they finally died. But yeah, that was a thing. And then we're at the very last level, and this is where I feel like a lot of the lore kind of falls apart, and I don't know what's going on here. Essentially, in this last level, Fireteam Raven, they find themselves back at the Pillar of Autumn's crash site, and Master Chief is flying the Banshee to the Pillar of Autumn because he wants to blow up the Pillar of Autumn and destroy the ring. And essentially, our job is to go on a suicide mission to stop the Covenant from blowing up the Pillar of Autumn so that Master Chief can blow up the Pillar of Autumn. I still don't understand this, but essentially, there's a lot going on. There's scarabs. We end up boarding a scarab and taking it out, but it's on rails, so it's not like we're actually doing anything. It is a little interesting fighting your way through a scarab like you would in Halo 3, but in this on-rail setting, and hunters are popping up, and eventually you do destroy the scarab, and you save the day by saving the Pillar of Autumn, in which Master Chief then destroys the Pillar of Autumn, and Fireteam Raven dies, sacrificing themselves for whatever reason. And you beat the game from there. Even the little Halo rings that are on top of the machine shut off because the ring has been destroyed, which is kind of neat. And yeah, that's Halo Fireteam Raven. And honestly, there's a lot here. There's a very okay, mediocre arcade game that is presented in a really cool and high quality way. And then there's all the Halo stuff, which if you're a very, very casual Halo fan or you don't know anything about Halo at all, it's an interesting first taste, though I don't see anyone who's not a Halo fan sitting through the entire game. And also, unless you're set out and determined to want to beat all of Fireteam Raven, I don't think many Halo fans would want to do this either. I think at the end of the day, the game as a shooter isn't good enough to warrant a lot of replayability or just playability in general. And as a Halo arcade experience, I don't think it really leans in the most unique storytelling or world building or atmosphere to warrant players wanting to really experience this. There was a couple of cool set pieces that were revisited from the game. However, the fresh set pieces were very, very dull, and even the cool set pieces were still repetitive. I feel weird talking about my critiques about Fireteam Raven because it is something so different from a regular Halo game that it's very much a casual game, and the more I look into it, the more it's defeating its own purpose. But I can't help but to think that they could have maybe told just a different story or a completely different story and still had it be impactful. The whole idea of Fireteam Raven being this group of ODSTs didn't really matter at the end of the day. They could have just been Spartans or Marines or anything really, because the whole point of them being ODSTs didn't play into any of this. There wasn't any dialogue or character growth like you would see from a ODST type game. Not that you would expect to see a huge amount of character development in an arcade game, but still, you get what I mean. The characters themselves were just weirdly irrelevant, if that makes any sense. I think this game could have been way cooler if they would have just gone with a larger time frame of a story rather than just condensing it to just Combat Evolved, or maybe doing something in a different set piece like Halo 2, but there just felt like there was no pacing whatsoever. And while each level is supposed to be kind of like a roller coaster theme park ride with some shooting in it, it very much lacked the gameplay part that you expect from arcade games. ultimately, this is a pretty mediocre Halo experience. We ended up spending like $65 to $70 to actually beat the game between both of us with how much we died, and that's just for 2 players. It definitely didn't feel like it paid off, especially because at that Dave & Buster's, all the other arcade machines give you points for just playing and for doing well or bad, which you can then use those points to cash in at the little gift shop at the end of your night. And we spent $70 on this game, and Fireteam Raven gives you nothing. So you get nothing to show for it except less money and a pretty subpar experience. Yeah, and just comparatively, it wasn't really all that great. We tried connecting our Halo Waypoint accounts so that we could get the cool thing in Master Chief Collection, but it didn't work. And at that point, Luke was feeling incredibly nauseous after playing Fireteam Raven, and he thought he was going to either throw up or pass out or both, so our group ended up leaving. Luke was feeling better after walking multiple miles outside in the cold rather than playing more Fireteam Raven. So that was Fireteam Raven, and now we officially have a video of our experience on this channel, and that's something we're proud of. Would we play Fireteam Raven again? Like, maybe if someone like wanted us to somewhere, they're like, hey, look, you guys should play the big Halo thing because you guys know Halo. Here you go, I already paid for your game. Yeah, I guess I would play a little bit to not be rude, but outside of that, I don't know if I ever need to play this game again. If they make a sequel, I'll of course play it, if they make another arcade game one day, but I don't know. I feel like they could have done something bigger and better with the same budget and tools and goals in mind that they had for this. But that's just my opinion. Have you guys played Fireteam Raven? Let us know in the comments on what your experiences were. Are we way off? Do you think this is the greatest experience ever and we're just missing something? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on for more videos like this. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.